Let's get started. Welcome everybody. Hope everybody's doing good today. 4. Meaning of the methodology. Dialectical materialism builds the most basic and common methodological principles for human cognitive and practical activities on the following basis. Point number 1. Hold on, I got something in my glasses. There we go. Point number 1. The viewpoint of the material nature of the world. Matter comes first, consciousness comes after. The dynamic and creative nature of consciousness. The dialectical relationships between matter and consciousness. So matter is things that are in motion. Things like the mode of production is matter in motion, and we are part of the matter in motion, and our consciousness are affected by matter in motion in the material world. All right, here we go. All cognitive and practical activities of humans originated from material reality and must observe objective, natural, and social laws. However, our activities are capable of impacting the material world through dynamic and creative consciousness actively. The above paragraph summarizes an important methodological concept, which is critical for understanding the philosophical framework of dialectical materialism. Dialectical materialism as a philosophy synthesizes earlier materialist and idealist positions by recognizing the fact that the material determines consciousness, while consciousness can impact the material world through willful activity. For this philosophical basis, the methodology of Marxist materialist dialectics has been developed to provide. So materialist dialectics is our conscious efforts when we have the material conditions give us like, okay, what's up? And then we take our conscious effort and we consciously engage with the material world. That's materialist dialectics. Has been developed to provide a deeper understanding of dialectical development, which is rooted in contradictions and negations within and between subjects. Materialist dialectics is the subject in chapter 2, According to this methodological principles, i.e. the principles of dialectic relationship between matter and consciousness, if we hope to succeed in accomplishing our goals in the material world, then we must simultaneously meet 2 criteria. First one, we must ensure that our knowledge reflects the objective material world as much as possible, respecting the objective natural and social laws of the material world. 2, we must simultaneously recognize the dynamic and creative nature of our conscious activity. When we say that human activity originated from material reality and must observe objective natural and social laws, we mean that human knowledge must originate from the material world. This means that if we hope to be successful in our activities, we should respect the natural and social laws of the material world. Who's in here? Some dude. This means that in our human perceptions and activities, we must determine goals and set strategies, policies, and plans which are rooted firmly in the objective material reality. Humans have to take objective material reality as the foundation of our activities and plans, and all of our activities must be carried out in the material world. Humans have to examine and understand our material conditions and transform them in ways that will help us to accomplish our goals. When we talk about impacting the material world through dynamic and creative conscious activity, we mean we must recognize the positive, dynamic, and creative roles of consciousness. We must recognize the role human consciousness plays in a dynamically and creatively manifesting our will in the material world through labor, impacting the material world through conscious activity at a revolutionary scale requires humans to respect and understand the role of scientific knowledge, to study laboriously, to master such knowledge, and then to propagate such knowledge so to the masses to develop public knowledge and belief so as to guide the people's action. Moreover, we also have to voluntarily study and practice in order to form and improve our revolutionary viewpoint and willpower, in order to have both scientific and humanitarian activity guidelines. To implement this principle, i.e. the principle of dialectic relationships between matter and consciousness, we have to avoid fighting against and overcome the diseases of subjectivism and idealism through such errors as, quote, as the first bullet point, attempting to impose idealist plans and principles which are not rooted in material conditions into reality. Consider fantasies, illusions, and imaginations instead of reality. Basing policies and programs on subjective desires, using sentiment as the starting point for developing policies, strategies, etc. On the other hand, in cognitive and practical activities, we also have to fight against empiricism, which disregards scientific knowledge and theories, and which is also very conservative, stagnant, and passive. We have a picture. Let's see if we can do this picture well. No, did someone really give me 100 choices? All right, so here we have in the book, we have understanding the role and importance of knowledge, laboriously studying and mastering knowledge, propagate knowledge to the masses, process of developing revolutionary public knowledge. Developing revolutionary public knowledge must be preceded by mastery of knowledge and a firm grounding in the role and nature of knowledge. Thank you. In socialism, utopian and scientific, Engels makes a scathing critique of idealist socialist revolutionary thought writing. To all these idealist socialists, socialism is the expression of absolute truth, reason, and justice, and has only to be discovered to conquer all the world by virtue of its own power, and as an absolute truth is independent of time, space, and the historical development of man. It is a mere accident when and where it is discovered. With all its absolute truth, reason, and justice are different with the founder of each different school. And as each one special kind of absolute truth, reason, and justice is again conditioned by his subjective understanding, his conditions of experience, and the measure of his knowledge and his intellectual training. There is no other ending possible in this conflict of absolute truth than that they shall be mutually exclusive of one another. Here, Engels points out the absurdity of the idea that some abstract, purely ideal truth could liberate workers in the material world. Engels continues on explaining how such idealist socialism could never lead to meaningful revolutionary change. Hence, from this nothing could come but a kind of eclectic average socialism, which, as a matter of fact, has up to the present time dominated the minds of most of the socialist workers in France and England. Hence, a mishmash allowing of the most manifold shades of opinion, a mishmash of such critical statements, economic theories, pictures of future society by the founders of different sects as incites a minimum of opposition, a mishmash which is the more easily brewed and more definite sharp edges of the individual constitutes are rubbed down in the stream of debate like rounding a pebble in a brook. In other words, idealist revolutionary movements only tend to result in endless debate and meaningless theories which are divorced from objective reality and material conditions. Such theories and idealist construction do not lead to effect actions in the real world. Socialism must become real, i.e., based in objective material conditions and praxis in the real world to affect change in the material world, as Engels explains elsewhere in Socialism, Utopian and Scientific. The critique of the Gotha program, Marx lays out an excellent case study of the failings of incoherent idealist socialism. He begins by quoting the Gotha program, which was an ideological program which the German Workers' Party hoped to implement. In this text, Marx cites the Gotha program line by line and offers his materialist critique of the idealist principles presented. In the following passage, Marx refutes some key errors caused by idealism and offers materialist corrections. Labor is not the source of all wealth. Nature is just as much the source of use value, and it is surely of such that material wealth consists, as labor, which itself is only the manifestation of a force of nature, human labor power. But a socialist program cannot allow such bourgeoisie phrases to pass over in silence the conditions that alone give them meaning. And insofar as man from the beginning behaves towards nature, the primary source of all instruments and subjects of labor, as an owner treats her as belonging to him, his labor becomes the source of use value, therefore also of wealth. The bourgeoisie have very good grounds for falsely ascribing supernatural creative powers to labor, since precisely from the fact that labor depends on nature, it follows that the man who possesses no other property than his labor power must in all conditions of society and culture be the slave of other men who have made themselves the owners of the material conditions of labor. He can only work with their permission, hence live only with their permission. Here, Marx points out the importance of having a firm understanding of the material reality of labor and its relations to the material natural world. Marx points out that the idea of labor alone is the source of all wealth is an idealist notion of a bourgeoisie of false consciousness, which prevents proper material analysis and props up the capitalist viewpoint. A failure to grasp the truth of the material basis of reality weakens the socialist position, and in any movement built on such weak idealist foundations will lead to failure in trying to bring about revolutionary change. We have already discussed the shortcomings of empiricism in annotation 10, page 10, but it might be helpful to see another case study, this time from Engels, pointing out the flaws of empiricist analysis. In his text, Anti-Düring, Engels begins by quoting the empiricist Eugene Düring, who wrote, "Philosophy is the development of the highest form of consciousness, of the world and of life, and in a wider sense embraces the principles of all knowledge and volition." Wherever a series of cognition or stimuli or a group of forms of being come to being examined by human consciousness, the principles underlining this manifestation is of necessity become an object of philosophy. These principles are the simple, or until now assumed to be simple, constituents of manifolds, knowledge and volition. Like the chemical composition of bodies, the general constitution of things can be reproduced to basic forms of basic elements. These ultimate constituent or principles, once they have been discovered, are valid not only for what is immediately known and accessible, but also for the world which is unknown and inaccessible to us. Philosophical principles, consequently, provide the final supplement required by the science in order to become a uniform system by which nature and human life can be explained. Apart from the fundamental forms of all existence, philosophy has only two specific subjects of investigation: nature and the world of man. According to our material arranges itself quite naturally into three groups, namely the general scheme of the universe, the science of the principles of nature, and finally the science of mankind. This successions at the same time contain an inner logical sequence for the formal principles which are valid for all being, take precedence, and the realms of the object to which they are to be applied then follow in the degree of their subordination. Engels then proceeds to critique this empiricist worldview, shows that it does not properly reflect the material world and amounts to idealism in its own right. So like what we just read was based on idealism. What Düring is dealing with are therefore principles, formal tenets derived from thought and not from external world, which are to be applied to nature and the realm of man, and to which therefore nature and man have to conform. But whence does thought obtain these principles? From itself? For here Düring himself says, the realm of pure thought is limited to logical schemata and the mathematical forms. The latter, moreover, as we shall see, is wrong. Logical schemata can only relate to forms of thought, but what we are dealing with here is solely forms of being. The external world and these forms can never be created or derived by thought out of itself, but only from the external world. But with this, the whole relationship is inverted. The principles are not the starting point of the investigation, but its final results. They are not applied to nature and human history, but abstract from them. It is not nature and the realm of man which forms these principles, but the principles are only valid insofar as they are in conformity with nature and history. That is the only materialist conception of the matter, and her Düring contrary conception is idealistic, makes things stand completely on their head, and fashions the real world out of ideas, out of schemata, schemes, or categories existing somewhere before the world, from eternity, just like Hegel. Lenin also heavily criticized empiricism in his work Materialism and Empiro-criticism, which we discussed at length. Chapter 2. Now we're talking about materialist dialectics. Materialist dialectics is one of the basic theoretical parts that form the worldview and philosophical methodology of Marxism-Leninism. It is the science of common relations and also the science of common rules of motion and development of nature, society, and human thought. Dialectics, as understood by Marx and also in conformity with Hegel, includes not what is now called the theory of knowledge or epistemology. Note, epistemology is the theoretical study of knowledge. For more information, see cognitive theory and dialectical materialism. 1. Dialectics and materialist dialectics. Dialectics, a basic form of dialectics. A. Definition of dialectics and subjective dialectics. Here we go. In Marxism-Leninism, the term dialectics refers to regular relationships, transformation, motion, and developments of things, phenomena, and processes in nature, society, and human thought. There are two forms of dialectics, the objective dialectics and the subjective dialectics. The objective dialectics is the dialectics of the material world, while subjective dialectics is the reflection of objective dialectics of human consciousness. According to Engels, dialectics, so-called objective dialectics, prevail throughout nature, and so-called subjective dialectics, dialectical thought, is only the reflection of the motion through opposites which exert itself everywhere in nature, and which by the continual conflict of the opposites of their final passage into one another or into higher forms determine the life of nature. When it turns to higher forms, that's a qualitative shift. Everybody, we'll learn about that. Dialectics is an umbrella term which includes both forms of dialectical systems, subjective and objective dialectics. Objective dialectics are the dialectical processes which occur in the material world, including all motion, relationships, and dynamic changes which occur in space and time. Subjective dialectics, or dialectical thought, is a system of analysis and organized thinking which aims to reflect the objective dialectics of the material world within human consciousness. Dialectical thinking has two component forms: dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics. Subjective dialectics is the theory that studies and summarizes the objective dialectics of nature into a system with scientific principles and rules in order to build a system of methodological principles and perceptions and practice. Dialectics is opposed to metaphysics, a system of thought which conceives of things and phenomena in the world in an isolated and unchanged state. B. Basic forms of dialectics. Dialectics has developed into three basic forms and levels: ancient primitive dialectics, German idealist dialectics, and materialist dialectics of Marxist-Leninism. Ancient dialectics is the earliest form of dialectics. It was developed independently in many philosophical systems in ancient China, India, and Greece. And I would like to mention also Turtle Island. All right. Chinese philosophy has two major forms of ancient dialectics: changing theory, a theory of common principles and rules pertaining to the changes in the universe; the five elements theory, a theory of the principles of mutual impact that transforms the five elements of the universe, of the school of yin yang. The Indian, which is from India, philosophy, Buddhist philosophy, is a quintessential form of ancient dialectics, which includes such concepts as selflessness and impermanence and predestination. And ancient forms of dialectics also developed in ancient Greece philosophy. Frederick Engels wrote, quote, "The old Greek philosophers are all born natural dialecticians, and Aristotle, the most encyclopedic of them, had already analyzed the most essential forms of dialectic thought. This primitive, naive, but intrinsic correct conception of the world is that of ancient Greece philosophy, and was first clearly formulated by Heraclitus. Everything is and is not, for everything is fluid, is constantly changing, constantly coming into being and passing away." Engels also wrote of Greek dialectics, quote, "Here, dialectical thought still appears in its pristine simplicity, as yet undistributed by the charming obstacles which the metaphysicists of the 17th and 18th centuries, Bacon, Locke in England, Wolff in Germany, puts in its own way among the Greeks. Just because they were not yet advanced enough to dissect and analyze nature, nature is still viewed as a whole. In general, the universal connection of natural phenomenon is not proved to regard to particular. To the Greeks, it is the result of direct contemplation. Engels here is explaining how the ancient Greek dialecticians were correct to view nature as a cohesive system, a whole in general, which they determined through direct observation of the natural world. The major shortcomings of this ancient Greek form of dialectics was a lack of inquiry into specific processes and principles of nature. Engels laments that 17th and 18th century metaphysicists took us backwards to disregarding this view of nature as a cohesive general whole. Ancient dialectics had an accurate awareness of dialectical characteristics. And I want to mention that I want to bring in the indigenous populations of Africa, and I'm going to add on, because this is my critique of Turtle Island, because they were doing this. The world, but within its perspectives, it still lacked evidence-based forms of natural scientific achievements, which I will not include indigenous people in that. Jump forward to the late 16th century, natural sciences started developing rapidly in Europe. Scientists began deeply analyzing the studies, specific forms and phenomena of nature, which led to the birth of modern European metaphysical analysis. In the 18th century, metaphysics became the dominant methodology of philosophical thought and scientific study. However, when natural scientists moved from studying each subject separately to studying the unification of all those subjects in their relationship, the metaphysical method proved inefficient. Thus, European scientists and philosophers had to transition into a more advanced system of thought, dialectical thought. Who's in the thing? How's everybody doing? Hope everybody's okay. Engels discuss. Wait. The classic German idealist dialectics were founded by Kant and completed by Hegel. According to Engels, the second form of dialectics, which is the form that comes closest to the German naturalists, natural scientists, and classical German philosophy from Kant to Hegel. Engels discuss this history and the shortcomings of the metaphysical philosophy of his era in the old preface of Anti-Düring. First, Engels explains why early modern natural scientists initially did not feel constrained by their adherence to metaphysics, since inquiries in the initial revolution of scientific study were limited to a narrow development of specific fields of inquiry of necessity. Empirical natural science has accumulated such a tremendous mass of positive material from knowledge that the necessity of classifying it in each separate field of investigation systematically and in accordance with its interconnection has become absolutely imperative. Their understanding that interconnection is one of the biggest things. Engels goes on to explain that at the time he was writing, enough knowledge had been accumulated within specific distinct fields that it becomes necessary to beginning studying the connections and overlaps between different fields, which call for theoretical and philosophical foundations. It is becoming equally imperative to bring the individual spheres of knowledge into the correct connection with one another. In doing so, however, natural science enters the field of theory, and here the methods of empiricism will not work. Here, only theoretical thinking can be of assistance. Unfortunately, natural scientists were held back by the existence of metaphysical theoretical foundations, which were dominant at the time, as according to Engels, theoretical thinking is an innate quality only as regards natural capacity. This natural capacity must be developed, improved, and for its improvement, there is as yet no other means than the study of previous philosophies. Metaphysical theory and formal logic were in common use by natural scientists at the time. As Marx as Engels explains in On Dialectics and Dialectics of Nature, metaphysics and formal logic could never be useful as dialectical analysis for examining and unifying concepts from wide-range dynamic systems of overlapping fields of inquiry. Unfortunately, dialectics had not yet been suitable developed for use in the natural sciences before the work of Marx and Engels in developing dialectical materialism, as Engels explains on Dialectics. Formal logic itself has been the area of violent controversy from the time of Aristotle to the present day, and dialectics has so far been fairly closely investigated by only two thinkers, Aristotle and Hegel. But it is precisely dialectics that constitute the most important form of thinking for present-day natural science, for it alone offers the analog for, and thereby the methods to explain, the evolutionary processes occurring in nature, interconnection in general, and transition from one field of investigation to another. The idealist dialectics of Hegel constituted a major development in dialectics, but the idealist nature of Hegelian dialectics made them unsuitable for natural scientists, who therefore discarded old Hegelian dialectics and were thus left without a suitable dialectical framework. Again, from one dialectics, the year 1848, which otherwise brought nothing but a conclusion in Germany, accomplishing a complete revolution there only in the sphere of philosophy, and the nation resolutely turned its back on classical German philosophy that had lost itself in the sands of Berlin, old Hegelianism. But a nation that wants to climb the pinnacle of science cannot possibly manage without theoretical thought. Not only Hegelianism, but dialectics too was thrown overboard, and that just at the moment when the dialectical character of natural processes irresistibly forced itself upon the mind, when therefore only dialectics could be of assistance to natural science in negotiating the mountain of theory. And so there was a helpless relapse into the old metaphysics. Engels goes on to explain that, having rejected Hegel's dialectics, natural scientists were set adrift, cobbled together theoretical frameworks from the works of philosophers, which were plagued by idealism and metaphysics, and which were therefore not suitable for the task of unifying the desperate fields of natural science together. What prevailed among the public since then were, on the one hand, a vapid reflection of, what's this word? Skyopenfer. I don't know how to say his name, which were fashioned to fit the Philistine and later even those of Hartmann, and on the other hand, the vulgar iterant preacher materialism of the Vogt and the Boncher. Sorry, everybody. These are words that these are people I cannot pronounce the name. At the universities, the most diverse varieties of eclecticism compete with one another, and had only one thing in common, namely that they were concocted from nothing but remnants of old philosophies, and were all equally metaphysical. All that was saved from the remnants of classical philosophy, as was a certain neo-Kantism, whose last words was the internally unknowable thing in itself. That is, the bit of Kant that least merited preservation. The final result was the incoherence and confusion of theoretical thoughts now prevalent Engels explains that this lack of proper dialectical materialism framework has frustrated natural scientists of his era. One can scarcely pick up the theoretical book of natural science without getting the impression that natural scientists themselves feel how much they are dominated by this incoherence and confusion, and that the so-called philosophy now current offers them absolutely no way out. And here, there really is no other way out, no possibility of achieving clarity than by a return in one form or another from metaphysics to dialectical thinking. After explaining that, Hegel's system of dialectics came closest to meeting the needs of contemporary science. Engels explains how Hegelian dialectics were ultimately rejected by the scientific community. Just as little came of the Hegelian system as it was preached by the Berlin Hegelians of the older and the younger line. Hence, with the fall of the idealist point of departure, the system built upon it, in particular Hegelian philosophy of nature, also falls. It must, however, be recalled that the natural scientists' polemic against Hegel, in so far as they at all correctly understood him, was directed solely against these 2 points, viz. The idealist point of departure and the arbitrary fact-defying construction of the system. In other words, it was the idealism and the unworkable unstructuring of Hegelian dialectics that prevented its adoption by the natural scientists. Engels finally explains how Marx was able to modify Hegel's idealist dialectics into a materialist form which is suitable for empirical scientific inquiry. It is the merit of Marx that he was the first to have brought to the fore again the forgotten dialectical methods, its connection with Hegelian dialectics and its distinction from the latter, and at the same time to have applied this method of capital to the fact of an empirical science political economy. These classic German philosophers, Hegel and Kant, systematically organized idealist dialectics into formal philosophies. Of particular note was Hegel's belief that the dialectical process would eventually lead to an absolute idea. This foundational belief in an absolute idea is what chiefly defines Hegelian dialectics as idealist in nature. Hegel believed that the subjective dialectics is the basis of the objective dialectics. In other words, Hegel believed that dialectical thought served as an objective dialectics of the material world. According to Hegel, the absolute idea was the starting point of all existence, and that this absolute idea, after created the natural world, then came the existence in human consciousness. Engels wrote that Hegel dialectics, spirit, mind, the idea is primary, and that the real world is only a copy of the idea. In the above quoted passage, Engels was explaining why Hegelian dialectics were unsuitable for use in natural sciences. Here is a longer excerpt. First of all, it must be established that here it is not at all a question of defending Hegel's point of departure at the spirit, mind, the idea is primary, in that the real world is only a copy of the idea. We all agree that in every field of science, and natural as the historical science, one must proceed from the given facts. In natural science, therefore, from the various material forms and the various forms of motion of matter, that therefore the theoretical natural science too, the interconnection, are not to be built into the facts, but to be discovered in them. And when discovery is to be verified as far as possible by experiment. The German idealists, most notably Hegel, built the idealist system of dialectics organized into categories and common laws, along with the strict logic of consciousness. Lenin stated that Hegelian brilliantly divined the dialectics of things, phenomenon, the natural, the world, nature, and dialectics of concepts. What Lenin means here is that Hegel advertently and unconsciously discovered the concepts of reflection. Hegel intuitively understood that the material world was reflected in human consciousness, and by extension, subjective dialectics, dialectical thoughts, reflecting objective dialectics of the material world. Hegel's error was an inversion of the ideal of the material world, as Marx later pointed out in the afterword to the second German edition of Capital One. It is the material which precedes the ideal, and not the other way around. My dialectical method is not only different from the Hegelian, but is its direct opposite. To Hegel, the life process of human brain, i.e., the process of thinking, which under the name of, quote, the idea, he even transforms into the independent subject, is the demagogues, craftsmen, artisans, creators of the real world, and the real world is only the external phenomenon form of, quote, the idea. With me, on the contrary, the ideal is nothing else than the material world reflecting by the human mind, the translated into forms of thought. Engels also quoted and emphasized Marx's thought in the old preface to Anti-Düring, citing another quote of Marx from the afterword of the second German edition of Capital One. Further quoting in the mystification which dialectics suffers in Hegel's hand by no means prevents him from being the first to present its general form of working in a cohesive and conscious matter. With him it is standing on its head. It must be turned right side up again, if you would discover the rational kernel within the mystical shell. The only preface to Anti-Düring, in the old preface to Anti-Düring, Engels explains some of the contemporary currents of science and philosophy in his era. Engels explains that Hegelian philosophy had been dismissed by the newer current in natural sciences, who dismiss the idealist point of departure and the arbitrary fact-defying construction of the system. In other words, the natural scientists reject Hegelianism because it was both idealist and was not built on the foundation of objective facts. Engels points out, however, that Marx was the first to have thought of the four again and forgotten dialectical methods of Hegel. The dialectical methods was forgotten in the sense that natural scientists ignored and dismissed dialectics along with the rest of Hegel's philosophy. So Engels is pointing out that one of the greatest contributions of Marx was salvaging the dialectical methods of Hegel while rejecting the idealist and non-fact-based characteristics of Hegelian philosophy. Marx, according to Engels, proved that the dialectical methods could be separated from idealism by applying dialectical methods in capital to the fact of an empirical science, political economy. This was the origins of dialectical materialism, the resurrection of dialectical methods, and the development of dialectical methods in a materialist and scientific form. The idealist characteristics of classical German dialectics and Hegelian philosophy was a limitation that needed to be overcome so that it could be utilized for scientific inquiry. Marx and Engels overcame that limitation and in so doing developed materialist dialectics. This system of dialectics is the most advanced form of dialectics in the history of philosophy. To date, it is a successor of previous systems of dialectics, and it arose as a critique of the classic German dialectics. Engels said, Marx and I were pretty well the only people to rescue conscious dialectics from German idealist philosophy and apply it to the materialist conception of nature and history. That's the end of the materialist dialectics. Consciousness being affected by the material world and engaging with the material world consciously and dialectically. Because everything has a relationship with one another. It's interconnected. 2. Materialist dialectics. The definition of materialist dialectics. Wait, was that? Hold on. Let me look. This is dialectical materialism. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is dialectical materialism. Making sure. Going back. Just a bit. Well, as soon as it gets there. Okay, I was talking about dialectics there. Okay. I was talking about dialectics. Okay. Hold on. Let me find where I'm at. I must find where I'm at. Does anybody know? I mean, I'll find it eventually. Oh, found it. Page 128. 2. Materialist dialectics. A. Definition of materialist dialectics. Materialist dialectics have been defined in various ways by many prominent Marxist-Leninist philosophers. Engels defines materialist dialectics as nothing more than the science of the general laws of motion and development of nature, human society, and thought. Engels also emphasizes the role of the principle of general relations, as John Barton Sanderson Haldane noted in the 1939 preface of Dialectics of Nature. In dialectics, they, Marx and Engels, saw the science of the general laws of change. Lenin emphasized the important roles of the principles of development, including the theory of cognitive development, in the dialectics of Marx inherited from Hegelian philosophy. Lenin wrote, quote, "The main achievement of dialectics, i.e., the doctrines of development in its fullest, deepest, and most comprehensive form, the doctrines of the relativity of human knowledge that provides us with the reflections of eternally developed matters." B. Basic features and roles of materialist dialectics. These are 2 basic features of materialist dialectics of Marxist-Leninism. First, materialist dialectics of Marxist-Leninism is a system of dialectics that is based on the foundation of scientific materialist viewpoints. Remember, the scientific in Marxist-Leninism refers broadly to the systematic pursuit of knowledge, research, theory, and understanding. Remember also that materialism and Marxist-Leninism has specific meanings as well, which differentiate its from other forms of materialism. Here, materialism includes the understanding that the material is the first basis of reality, meaning that the material determines the ideal, though human consciousness can impact the material world through willpower and labor. Materialism is also built upon scientific explanations, rooted in empirical data and practice, i.e. systematic experimentations and observation of the world. And finally, remember that viewpoint is the starting point of inquiry. Thus, the scientific materialist viewpoint is a perspective which begins analysis of the world in a manner that is both scientifically systematic in pursuit of understanding and firmly rooted in the materialist conception of the world. Note, materialist dialectics contains 12 basic pairs of categories, 2 basic principles, 3 universal laws. These are summarized respectively. Okay. In this way, materialist dialectics fundamentally differs from the classical German idealist dialectics, and especially differs from Hegelian dialectics, as these dialectics are founded on idealist viewpoints I swear to God, I'm reading Mao's On Contradiction. But it's dialectics instead. It's funny. I keep getting people that, like, requests. Just looking back a little bit. All right. Moreover, it is also the higher level of development compared to dialectical systems and thought found in the history of philosophy going back to ancient times. Such previous forms of dialectics were fundamentally based on the materialist stance. However, the materialism of those ancient times was still naive and surface level. Second, the materialist dialectics of Marxist-Leninism unifies dialectical materialism viewpoints and materialist dialectical methods. So it's not only explains the world, but it is also a tool humans can use to perceive and improve the world. Every principle and law of Marxist-Leninist materialist dialectics is both 1. An accurate explanation of the dialectical characteristics of the world. 2. A scientific methodology for perceiving and improving the world. By summarizing the general interconnections and development of all things, every phenomenon in nature, society, and human thought, Marxist-Leninism materialist dialectics provides the most general methodological principles for the process of perceiving and improving the world. They are not just objective methodological principles. They are a consistently developing a historical methodology. These methodologies can be used to analyze contradictions in order to find the basic origins of motivations of both motion and developmental processes. Therefore, materialist dialectics is a great scientific tool for the revolutionary class to perceive and improve the world. With these basic features, materialist dialectic plays a very important role in the worldview of philosophical methodology of Marxist-Leninism. Marxist dialectics are the foundations of scientific and revolutionary characteristics of Marxist-Leninism, and also offers the most general worldview and methodologies for creative activities in scientific studies and practical activities. Here we go. Let's see if we can translate this thing. What? Server's not available. What the fuck? There we go. All right, here we go. Human society. Individuals. The arrows. General principles of general relationships. All things, phenomena, and ideas related. So you see the scientific technology in human society. On the other side, you see principle of development, relationships, drive, development. You see individuals and natures. You see how they're connected with one another. The principles of general relationships and principles of development. The principles of general relationships and the principle of development are the most basic principles of materialist dialectics. These two principles are dialectically related to another. The following section will outline the principles in general relationships and the principle of development, which are the most fundamental principles of materialist dialectics. These two concepts are closely and dialectically related. Thank you, Joe. Hello. All right. Number 1, the principles of general relationships. A. Definitions of relationships and common relationships. The principles of general relationships describes how all things, phenomena, and ideas are related to one another and are defined by these internal and external relationships. The principles of development relates to the idea that motion, change, and development are driven by internal and external relationships. These two principles are dialectically linked. Any given subject is defined by its internal relationships, and these same relationships drive the development of every subject. Note, the foundations of the principles of materialist dialectics were laid out by Engels in Dialectics of Nature. Engels began working on Dialectics of Nature in February 1870 and had in 1876 to work on anti-Düring. He then restarted work on dialectical of nature in 1878 and continued to work on it until 1883 when Karl Marx died. Engels felt that it was more important to try to put together Marx's great unfinished work, Capital Volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4, and so stopped working on dialectics of nature once again. So unfortunately, Engels died before this seminal work on materialist dialectics could be completed, and what we have instead is an unfinished assemblage of notes. What follows is the rest of this book is cohesive systems of materialist dialectics, which was built upon the foundations laid out by Engels in Dialectics of Nature, and many other works of political and scholarly writing from various sources. This is the system of materialist dialectics studied by Vietnamese students and applied by Vietnamese communists today. Because this text comes from predominantly Vietnamese scholarships and ideological development, we have had to translate some terms into English which are not derived from the canon of Marx, Engels, and Lenin. In some cases, various terms have been consolidated into one concept. For example, Engels used the term interconnection, German interna, Zamaga, I can't say it, literally interconnection in Dialectics of Nature. But Vietnamese political scientists use the term relationship, where Engels uses the term motion. German, I can't say the word. Modern Vietnamese communists tend to use the word development. Wherever this is the case, we have chosen to use the words in English which most closely match the language used in the original Vietnamese of this text. So a little bit, I guess they're telling us a little bit of that. All right. The materialist dialectics, the word relationship refers to the regulating principles, mutual interactions, and mutual transformations which exist between things, phenomena, and ideas, as well as those existing between aspects and factors within things, phenomena, and ideas. Throughout this book, phenomenon simply refers to anything that is observable by the human senses. Materialist dialectics examines relationships between things, phenomena, and ideas, and within things, phenomena, and ideas, a relationship which occurs between two separate things or phenomena is referred to as a external relationship. The relationship which occurs within a thing or phenomenon is referred to the internal relationships. These terms are relative. Sometimes a relationship may be internal in one context, but external in a different context. For example, consider a solar system. Here we go. All right, maybe when considering a solar system as a whole, the orbit of the moon around the planet may be considered as an internal relationship of the solar system. But when considering the moon as an isolated subject, its orbit around the planet may be seen as an external relationship which the moon has with the planet. So you see, I don't know what, let me see here. I'm going to read it. External and internal relationships. The diagram above illustrates different types of relationship. Subject 1 has its own internal relationship, A, and forms its own perspective. It also has external relationships with object 2, B. Form a wider perspective, the relationship between object 1 and object 2. B may be viewed as an internal relationship. This system of relationship between object 1, object 2 will also be external relationship with other things, phenomena, and ideas. There you go. Thank you, Joe. Who is in the thing? All right. Relationships have an equality of generality, which refers to how frequently they occur between a thing, between and within things, phenomena, and ideas. When we refer to general relationships, we are usually referring to the relationship which exists broadly across many things, phenomena, and ideas. General relationship can exist both internally, within things, phenomena, and ideas, and externally between things, phenomena, and ideas. The most general relationships are universal relationships. These are relationships that exist between and within things and all phenomena, and they are one of the two primary subjects to study of materialist dialectics. All right, we got another thing. All right, so we have universal relationships, all things, phenomena, and ideas. You have the generality, more general relationships, less general, many things, phenomena, and ideas. Unique relationships, specific things, phenomena, and idea. Generality of relationships of materialist dialectics. Let's read this. The discussion of generality of relationships can seem confusing at first. What's important to understand is that generality is a spectrum ranging from the least general relationships, unique relationships, which only occur between two specific things, phenomena, and idea, and the most general relationships, universal relationships, which occur between or within all things, phenomena, and ideas. A practical importance of particular importance in the study of materialist dialectics are universal relationships, which exist within and between all things, phenomena, and ideas. Translation notes, the original Vietnamese word universal is not used. Instead, the compound term is pho ben nhat is used, in which literally means most general. In Vietnamese, this phrasing is commonly used to describe the concept of universal, and it is thus not confusing to Vietnamese speakers. For this translation, we have opted to use the word universal because we feel it is less confusing and better explained in concepts in English. Thank you. Are you good? Are we doing that more? Thank you, Joe. All right. Universal relationships include, but are not limited to. First bullet point: relationships between basic philosophical categories, pairs, private and common, essence and phenomenon, etc. Relationships between quantity and quality. Relationships between opposites. Together in all forms of relationships. In nature, society, and human thought, special, general, and universal. There is unity and diversity and unity. Principles and okay, we're good. Principle of general relationships. According to the curriculum of the philosophy of Marxism-Leninism, for university and college students specialized in Marxism-Leninism and Ho Chi Minh thought, materialist dialectics upholds the position that all things, phenomena, and ideas exist in mutual relationships with each other, regulate each other, transform into each other, and that nothing exists in complete isolation. That is the core idea of the principles of general relationships. From this principle, we find the characteristics of diversity and unity and diversity. The basis of diversity and unity is the fact that everything, phenomenon, or ideas contain many different relationships. And basis of unity and diversity is that many different relationships exist, unified within each and everything, phenomenon, and idea. Diversity and unity. Got another picture, everybody. You're full of pictures today. Diversity and unity. There exists an infinite number of diversity relationships between things, phenomena, and ideas, But all these relationships share the same foundation in the material world. Here we go. We have the material world, and we have infinite diversity of relationship. Okay. Diversity and unity. The infinite diversity of relationships exists within the unity of the material world. The material world is not a chaotic and random assortment of things, phenomena, and ideas. Rather, it is a system of relationships between things, phenomena, and ideas. Likewise, since the material world exists as the foundation of all things, phenomena, and idea, the material world is thus the foundation of all relationships within and between things, phenomena, and ideas. Because all relationships share a foundation in the material world, they also exist in unity, even though all relationships are diversified and different from one another. Thank you, Joe. Oh, is that the next one? Universal relationships, infinitely diverse manifestations. Universal relationships which unite all things, phenomena, and idea manifest indefinitely in diverse ways. Unity, oh, thank you. Unity in diversity. When we examine the universal relationships that exist within and between all things, between all different things, phenomena, and ideas, we will find that each individual manifestation of any universal relationship will have its own different manifestation, aspects, features, etc. Thus, even the universal relationship which unite all things, phenomena, and ideas exists in infinite diversity. Paraphrased from Curriculum and Philosophy of Marxism-Leninism for the University of College Students specialized in Marxism-Leninism and Ho Chi Minh thought. B. Characteristics of relationships. Objectiveness, generally, and diversity are the three basic characteristics of relationship. The characteristics of objectiveness and relationships. According to materialist dialectical viewpoint, relationships between things, phenomena, and idea are objective characteristics. In the material dialectical world, and I think you have another friend, in the materialist dialectics, objectiveness is an abstract concept that refers to the relativity externalities of all things, phenomena, and idea. Everything, phenomena, and idea exists externally to every other thing, phenomenon, and idea. This means that to each individual subject, i.e., each individual thing, phenomenon, and idea, all other things, phenomena, and ideas are external objects. Here we go. All right. There's Alice. External to each other. All things, phenomena, and idea. They're outside of them, but they're still connected. All things, phenomena, and ideas have a relative characteristics of objectiveness. All things, altogether, the collection of all things, phenomena, and ideas in the universe create the external reality of any given subject. So objectiveness is relative. In the case of human beings, every individual person exists as an individual subject to which all other things, phenomena, and idea, include other human beings, have objective characteristics. There you go. You have these external to each other. Alice and Bob. Alice and Bob are external to one another. Each is objective from the other's perspective. Of course, objectiveness is always relative. Sometimes I'll do this. What? Can you find the book of I don't know what Lynn's saying. Of course, objectiveness is always relative. Something might be external from a certain perspective, but not from another perspective. For example, say there are two people, Bob and Alice. From Bob's perspective, Alice has objective characteristics But from Alice's perspective, Bob would have objective characteristics, such as long hair or something. Okay, here we go. Another picture. This is picture friendly, hopefully. There you go. Relationships between Bob and Alice. Objective to both Alice and Bob. They both have different features, right? The relations between Alice and Bob has objective characteristics to both Alice and Bob, as all relationship is inherently external to any given subject, even subjects which are party to the relationship. Relationship also have objective characteristics. Whenever these phenomenons or ideas have a relationship with one another, they form a pair. The relationship is inherent to this pair and external to any subject which exists outside of the pair. The mutual interactions of mutual transformation which occurs to the things, phenomena, and objects within the pair as a result of the relationship are inherent and objective properties of the pair. Translation notes. So then they go in the translation notes. They're coming to tell you like what this word means and what do we use. So here we go. We're going to go over the translation notes. The original Vietnamese text, the word of objective is kanch quan. This is a compound word in which kanch means guest and quan means point of view. Therefore, kanch quan literally means the guest's or outsider point of view. Thus, we translate this to objectiveness, objective. The characteristics of being viewed from the outside. The word inherent. The original Vietnamese is von khu. This is another compound word. Von is a shortened form of the word von die, which means by or through nature, naturally and intrinsically. Ko means to have or to exist. Von ko thus means already existing naturally or already there through nature. So we use the word inherent to mean existing intrinsically or naturally without external influences. Human beings can change or impact external things and phenomena, and the relationship between them through human will alone. Humans are limited to perceiving relationships between things and phenomena and then impact or changing them through our practical activities. Real quick, I'm going to see where we're at. I know you have a lot of notes, so I'm going to try to find a stopping point. Remember page 138. Let's look ahead. I think we can try meaning of the methodology. Let's see here. That might be a good stopping point. So we'll stop there on page 139. So where was I at? What page was I on? Oh, wait, right here. I think it was on 138. Characteristics and generality of relationships. According to the dialectical viewpoint, there is no thing, phenomenon, or idea that exists in absolute isolation from other things, phenomena, and ideas. Although all things, phenomena, and ideas have a characteristic of externality and objectiveness to all other things, phenomena, and ideas, this does not mean that they exist in isolation. Isolation implies a complete lack of any relationship with other things, phenomena, and ideas. On the contrary, according to the principles of general relationships, all things, phenomena, and idea have relationship with all other things, phenomena, and idea. Simultaneously, there is also no known thing, phenomenon, or idea that does not have a systematic structure, including component parts, which in turn have their own internal relationships. This means that every existence is a system, and more so is an open system that exists in relations with other systems. All systems interact and mutually transform one another. As explained above, a systematic structure is a structure which includes within itself a system of component parts and relationships. It has been postulated by some scientific models that there may be some fundamental base particle, quark, piron, etc., which, if true, would mean that there is a certain basic material component which cannot be further broken down. However, this would not contradict the principles of materialist dialectics of general relationships, which states that all things, phenomena, and ideas interact with a mutually transform one another. The characteristics of diversity of relationship. In addition, affirming the objectiveness and generality of relationships, the dialectical viewpoint of Marxist-Leninism also emphasized the diversity of relationship. The characteristics of diversity is defined by the following features. All things, phenomena, and idea have different relationships. Every relationship plays a distinct role in the existence of development of things, phenomena, and ideas, which are included within. Any given relationship between things, phenomena, and idea will have different characteristics and manifestations under different conditions and or during different periods of motion and or at different stages of development. One of Marx's most critical observation was that things are defined by their internal and external relationships, including human beings. For example, the thesis of Feuerbach, Marx wrote that, quote, the essence of man is not abstraction inherent in each single individual. In reality, it is a symbol of social relations. It is only through relationships, through mutual impacts and transformations, that things, phenomena, and ideas, include human beings and human society, change and develop over time. All of these relationships, which both define and transform all things, phenomena, and idea in existence, exists in infinite diversity. Just as things, phenomena, and idea change and transform through the course of relationships with one another, the nature of the relationship themselves also change the development over time. Characteristics refer to the features and attributes that exist internally within a given thing, phenomenon, or idea. Manifestation refers to how a given thing, phenomenon, or idea is expressed externally in the material world. For example, a ball may have the characteristics of being made of rubber, having a mass of 100 grams, and having a melting point of 260 Celsius. It may manifest by bouncing on the ground, having a spherical shape, and having a red appearance to human observers. If 10 such balls existed, they will all be slightly different. Even if they have the same mass and material composition, they will have slightly different variations in size and shape, etc. Even if the ball will melt at 260 Celsius, the melting will manifest differently for each ball. They will melt into slightly different shapes at slightly different speeds, etc. Relationship also has characteristics of manifestations. For example, the moon's orbit around the Earth is a relationship. It has a characteristic such as the mass of each related bodies, forces, the gravity, and other factors which produce the influence that orbits. The same orbital relationship also has manifestations such as the duration of moon's orbit around the Earth, the size of its ellipse, the orbit's effect on the tides of the Earth, oceans, etc. Characteristics and manifestation corresponds respectively to philosophical categories paired of content and form, which is discussed in page 147. Therefore, no two relationships are exactly the same, even if they exist between every similar thing, phenomenon, and idea, or and or in very similar situations. It is also important to note that characteristics of diversity also applies to things, phenomena, and ideas themselves. In other words, every individual thing, phenomenon, idea in existence also manifests differently from every other thing, phenomenon, and idea in existence, even if they seem quite similar. And we'll stop there. We'll go on to C, the meaning of the methodology. And let me put my thing in there, and let me get my, before you start, let me get my headset, if you don't mind. Let me just do this real quick before you start, so that way you can get rid of the, all right, there's no, dang it. Hold on. Bookmark. Hold on. I'm almost done, guys. Almost done. We're ending on page 139. All right, hold on. Let me get my headset. Oh, getting it on right. Hello? Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
I think I'll do these here. All right. Sorry, that was weird. All right, Joe. We'll just keep it the same way we did last time. We'll have you go through the notes. And if anybody has any questions while we go through the notes, like you or me, Doodly, Joe, I think will be okay with us stopping and saying, hey, I have a question. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay. Meaning of the methodology. Dialectical materialism builds the most basic and common methodological principles for human cognitive and practical activities on the following basis: the viewpoint of the material nature of the world, the dynamic and creative nature of consciousness, and the dialectical relationship between matter and consciousness. All cognitive and practical activities of humans originate from material reality and must observe objective nature and social laws. However, our activities are capable of impacting the material world through dynamic and creative conscious thinking. And according to this methodological principle, if we hope to succeed in accomplishing our goals in the material world, then we must simultaneously meet two criteria. Simultaneously means at the same time. We must ensure that our knowledge reflects the objective material world as much as possible, respecting the objective, natural, and social laws of the material world, and we must simultaneously recognize the dynamic and creative nature of our conscious activity. When we say that human activities originate from material reality and must observe objective, natural, and social laws, we mean that human knowledge must originate from the material world. This means that if we hope to be successful in our activities, we should respect the natural and social laws of the material world. Okay, and then my next note was here. Idealist revolutionary movements only tend to result in endless debate and meaningless theories which are divorced from objective reality and material conditions. Such theories and idealist constructions do not lead to effective action in the real world. Socialism must become real. So then my next note was on materialist dialectics. Materialist dialectics is one of the most basic theoretical parts that form the worldview and philosophical methodology of Marxism-Leninism. It is the science of common relations and also the science of common rules of motion and development of nature, society, and human thoughts. Dialectics, as understood by Marx and also in conformity with Hegel, includes what is now called the theory of knowledge or epistemology. In some definitions, dialectic refers to regular relationships, interactions, transformations, motions, and developments of things, phenomena, and processes in nature, society, and human thought. And then there are two forms of the dialectic, the objective dialectic and the subjective dialectic. The objective dialectic is the dialectic of the material world, while the subjective dialectic is the reflection of objective dialectics in human consciousness, so in your head. Dialectics is an umbrella term which includes both forms of dialectical systems, subjective and objective dialectics. And then once again, Objective dialectics are the dialectical processes which occur in the material world, including all motion, relationships, and dynamic changes which occur in space and time. Subjective dialectics, or dialectical thought, is a system of analysis and organized thinking, which aims to reflect the objective dialectics of the material world within human consciousness. Dialectical thinking has two component forms: dialectical materialism and materialist dialectics. And then subjective dialectics is the theory that studies and summarizes the objective dialectic of nature into a system with scientific principles and rules in order to build a system of methodological principles of perception and practice. And that's opposed to metaphysics, which is a system of thought which conceives of things and phenomena in the world in an isolated and unchanging state. And then we went into basic forms of dialectics. Ancient dialectics is the earliest form of dialectics. It is developed independently in many philosophical systems. So it developed independently in a bunch of places around the same time. In ancient China, India, and Greece. And then Chinese philosophy, since we're Maoists, I figured that might be kind of important, has two major forms of ancient dialectics: changing theory, a theory of common principles and rules pertaining to the changes in the universe, and the five elements theory, which is a theory of the principles of mutual impact and transformation of the five elements of the universe. And then Engels said the second form of dialectics, which is the form that comes closest to the German naturalists or the natural scientists, is classical German philosophy from Kant to Hegel. I thought that was important. Metaphysical theory and formal logic were in common use by natural scientists at the time. As Engels explained in On Dialectics and Dialectic, metaphysics and formal logic could never be as useful as dialectical analysis for examining and unifying concepts from wide-ranging dynamic systems of overlapping fields of inquiry. And then idealism and the unworkable structure of Hegelian dialectics prevented its adoption by natural scientists because it was like mystification, idealism. Okay, these classical German philosophers, Kant, Hegel, etc., systematically organized idealist dialectics into formal philosophies. Of particular note was Hegel's belief that the dialectical process would eventually lead on to an absolute idea. This foundational belief in an absolute idea is what chiefly defines Hegelian dialectics as idealist in nature. And then there's some stuff about Hegel. Hegel believed that dialectical thought served as the objective dialectics of the material world. And according to Hegel, the absolute idea was the starting point of all existence, and that this absolute idea, after creating the natural world, like God, then came to exist within human consciousness. Engels wrote that in Hegelian dialectics, spirit, mind, the idea, is primary, and that the real world is only a copy of the idea. German idealists, most notably Hegel, built an idealist system of dialectics organized into categories and common laws along with a strict logic of consciousness. And he said, Lenin stated that Hegel divined the dialectics of things, which is like he thought in his head and got it through God kind of thing. I think it's kind of a joke. Lenin said Hegel inadvertently and unconsciously discovered the concept of reflection. Hegel intuitively understood that the material world was reflected in human consciousness, and by extension, subjective dialectics, or dialectical thought, reflected objective dialectics of the material world. Hegel's error was in the inversion of the ideal and the material. Marx later said, it is the material which precedes the ideal and not the other way around. So Hegel was close.
Yeah, Hegel observed the dialectics of things and how they relate to another, but he didn't ground it in material. He grounded it
Yes.
into mystification and idealism.
Yep. The dialectical method was forgotten in the sense that the natural scientists ignored and dismissed dialectics along with the rest of Hegel's philosophy. So Engels is pointing out that one of the great contributions of Marx was salvaging the dialectical method from Hegel while rejecting the idealist and non-fact-based characteristics of Hegelian philosophy. Marx, according to Engels, proved that the dialectical method could be separated from idealism by applying the dialectical method in capital to the facts of an empirical science, political economy. This was the origin of dialectical materialism, the resurrection of the dialectical materialism, and the development of a dialectical method in a materialist and scientific form. And then we go to materialist dialectics. Materialist dialectics have been defined in various ways by many prominent Marxist-Leninist philosophers, but Engels defined materialist dialectics as nothing more than the science of the general laws of motion and development of nature, human society, and thought. And Lenin said, the main achievement was dialectics, i.e. the doctrine of development in its fullest, deepest, and most comprehensive form. The doctrine of the relativity of human knowledge that provides us with a reflection of eternally developing matter. And then we went to the basic features and roles of materialist dialectics. There are two basic features of the materialist dialectics of Marxism-Leninism. First, the materialist dialectics of Marxism-Leninism is a system of dialectics that is based on the foundation of the scientific materialist viewpoint. And second, the materialist dialectics of Marxism-Leninism unifies dialectical materialist viewpoints and materialist dialectical methodology. So it's a dialectical materialist viewpoints and materialist dialectical methodology. So it not only explains the world, but it is also a tool humans can use to perceive and improve the world. And then remember that scientific, in this particular instance, refers to a systemic pursuit of knowledge, research, theory, and understanding. And materialism also has a specific meaning, and in this viewpoint of Marxism-Leninism, materialism includes an understanding that the material is the first basis of reality, meaning that the material determines the ideal. Though human consciousness can impact the material world through willpower and labor. Thus, a scientific materialist viewpoint is a perspective which begins analysis of the world in a manner that is both scientifically systematic in pursuit of understanding and firmly rooted in a materialist conception of the world. And then every principle and law of Marxist-Leninism materialist dialectics is both, at the same time, both an accurate explanation of the dialectical characteristics of the world and a scientific methodology for perceiving and improving the world. This methodology, I'm going to take a sip of my water. This methodology can be used to analyze contradictions in order to find the basic origins and motivations of both motion and developmental processes. Therefore, materialist dialectics is a great scientific tool for the revolutionary class to perceive and improve the world. And materialist dialectics are the foundation of the scientific and revolutionary characteristics of Marxism-Leninism, and also offer the most general worldview and methodology for creative activities in scientific study and practical activities. And then I got some principles here. Principles of general relationships. The principle of general relationships describes how all things, phenomena, and ideas are related to one another and are defined by these internal and external relationships. The principle of development relates to the idea that motion, change, and development are driven by internal and external relationships, and these two principles are dialectically linked. Any given subject is defined by its internal relationships, and these same relationships drive the development of every subject. Okay, in materialist dialectics, the word relationship refers to the regulating principles, mutual interactions, and mutual transformations which exist between things, phenomena, and ideas, as well as those existing between aspects and factors within things, phenomena, and ideas. And then a relationship which occurs between two separate things or phenomena is referred to as an external relationship, and a relationship which occurs within a thing or phenomenon is an internal relationship. Within, internal. Relationships have a quality of generality, which refers to how frequently they occur between and within things, phenomena, and ideas. When we refer to general relationships, we are usually referring to relationships which exist broadly across many things, phenomena, and ideas. General relationships can exist both internally, which is within things, phenomena, and ideas, and externally, which is between things, phenomena, and ideas. The most general relationships are universal relationships, and these are relationships that exist between and within everything and all phenomena, and they are one of the two primary subjects of study of materialist dialectics. Of particular importance in the study of materialist dialectics are universal relationships, which exist within and between all things, phenomena, and ideas. I know that was a repeat, but I just thought it was important to highlight it both times. It seemed important they wrote it twice. The universal relationships include relationships between basic philosophical category pairs, like private and common, essence and phenomena, etc., etc. Relationships between quality and quantity. Relationships between opposites. Together, in all forms of relationships in nature, society, and human thought, special, general, and universal, there is unity in diversity and diversity in unity. Materialist dialectics upholds the position that all things, phenomena, and ideas exist in mutual relationships with each other, regulate each other, transform into each other, and that nothing exists in complete isolation. From this principle, we find the characteristics of diversity and unity and diversity. The basis of diversity and unity is the fact that everything, phenomena or idea, contains many different relationships. The basis of unity and diversity is that many different relationships exist, unified, within each and everything, phenomenon, idea. Thus, even the universal relationships which unite all things, phenomena, and ideas, exist in infinite diversity. And the next thing was characteristics of relationships. We went over a lot of stuff today. Objectiveness, general.
Oh, you're done.
No,
You're done. Okay, my bad.
We still got a whole other category to go through here. This is where you almost stopped. Objectiveness, generality, and diversity are the three basic characteristics of relationships. In materialist dialectics, objectiveness is an abstract concept that refers to the relative externality of all things, phenomena, and ideas. Everything, phenomena, and idea exists externally to every other thing. This means that to each individual subject, all other things, phenomena, and ideas are external objects. So objectiveness is relative. In the case of human beings, every individual person exists as an individual subject to which all other things, phenomena, and ideas have objective characteristics. Objectiveness is always relative.
That's why we need each other. to like do this thing together. We need the collective effort. You know what I mean? Because all of us have different perspectives of objective reality, and some people will pick up on certain objectives and some won't, and we'll have to bring that into considerations that people will have to investigate. That like if Doodley says no, this star is there, we would all have to go like, okay, let's prove it. Oh, you're right, the star is there. I missed that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, as all relationships are inherently external to any given subject, even subjects which are party to the relationship, relationships also have objective characteristics. So the mutual interaction and mutual transformation which occurs to the things, phenomena, or objects within the pair as the result of the relationship are inherent and objective properties of the pair. And then we went over inherent and objective with the Vietnamese words. Human beings can't change or impact external things and phenomena, and the relationships between them, though human will alone, humans are limited to perceiving relationships between things and phenomena, and then impacting or changing them through our practical activities. And then we went into the characteristics of generality of relationships, and I highlighted a lot of stuff, but we just went over all that. So do we need to go over it again?
I don't know. I don't think so. Do you?
No. We just went over this. According to the dialectical viewpoint, there is no thing, phenomena, nor idea that exists in absolute isolation from other things, phenomena, and ideas. I mean, that's the most important thing to take away from it.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right. That was a good reading. I hope the notes weren't too much this time. It was a lot of information in a short period of time.
It was great. It was great. It was great.
Okay. And Dudley, what do you think?
Okay, I came into my first two criticisms of the book, which one was already made by a communist, that the examples given weren't varied enough and didn't give examples in such as like Africa or Turtle Island. The other critique I have was the usage of the word Philistine. The word Philistine, it was an old name that was documented in the Bible, and currently they are going through a genocide in.
It's not referring to Palestine.
It is.
It's not
That's
referring
where the name
to
comes from.
But it's not referring to them.
I'm saying that the word gets its meaning from that.
Let's find out. Philistine.
So a Philistine, early 19th century, from Philistine, originally with reference to a contribution between university students and townspeople in Jena, Germany.
Can I read the definition?
Oh, sorry, I was reading it.
Can I read the definition?
I was reading the history.
Yeah. A person who is hostile or indifferent to culture and the arts, or who has no understanding of them. Hostile or indifferent to culture and art. That's the definition of it.
Right.
Go ahead.
But he was reading the history of the word. They went and got you the source.
We're having a little struggle. It's fine to have a struggle.
No, I know.
Dudley's reading you the history.
Yeah, I was getting into the origin of the word, which is what my critique comes from. Early 19th century, from Philistine, originally with reference to a confrontation between university students and townspeople in Jena, Germany in the late 17th century. A sermon on the conflict quoted, "Philistines are upon you," Judges 16, which led to an association between townspeople and those hostile to culture. And that name Philistine, when they say Philistines are upon you, was a reference to Philistines, which now go by the name of Palestinians. That's my critique.
It says Hebrew.
Yeah, but it
Or
is
can I please? Were non-Semitic Safarian groups, like from I can't say it, who inhabited cities like Gaza and Ascalon, can't say a word, were known as warlike, non-circumcised people. Okay, that's what you're getting it from?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we're trying to correct you because you kind of said a slur.
And we're going through the struggle session. That's all we're doing right now. We're going through it. That's it. I'm not saying that I'm correct, but we're going through it. And I just found one of the points to that word.
There shouldn't be a when it's a slur. Thank you. I'm talking.
That brings duly to the correctness of these things. It's good to get this education by going through it and seeing what comes out at the end. We shouldn't run from these things right now. We should talk about them and learn. And based on this little thing, this historical evolution that I'm reading right now, it brings up what Doodley brought up. That's why I went to go look for myself. That's why I tell everybody, when someone tells you something, go look for yourself. Don't take everybody's word as validation yet. Listen to the words and go investigate. If someone comes to me and says that Marx was this, even if it's true, I'm still going to go look and see if it's true, so I can see it from my own eyes. And that's what I just did. Is that a fair thing to do? A fair?
Yes, that's a fair thing to do.
Okay. Did I do anything that's problematic?
No. You asked me for specifics, and we went through it.
Exactly. We should not be scared of doing these things. We should be able to nurture these things. These struggles are good. They're not bad. And if it's in good faith and principled, like me and Doodley are being, there's nothing wrong with having the conversation. That's my personal opinion. Anyways, it looks like they've started the live. So does anybody else have anything before I close it out?
Just much love and take care.
Okay. Are you mad at me?
No, I'm not mad at you.
Okay. You sound like you're down a little bit. That's why I asked.
Oh, no, I'm good.
Okay.